Thank you, Camilla, and thank you very much, JC, and thank you to everybody for joining us today. As Camilla said, the topic of open data can be very narrow, but it can also be very broad and encompass um, a lot of different policy challenges. So, as Camilla said, we've got Javier Lopez Gonzalez with us today, who is one of the, I mean, I don't think it would be overly generous to say one of the foremost experts in quantifying the benefits of digital trade. And so it's a real thrill for us to have him here with us on the workshop today. And I thought the best way to kick us off, Javier, would be just to ask you, in your world and in the world of digital trade, what does open data mean to you?
Thank you, Holly, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for the very flattering remarks. There's many of us that are trying to sort of make our way through the quantification of this environment, but I think we all agree that digitalization, open data is sort of one of the most important aspects of growing globalization. In terms of your question, what does open data mean to you? Maybe I would agree with the earlier statements that it's perhaps a broader thing. Perhaps two things come to mind. The first one is the idea of expanding digital connectivity. Now, we know that digital connectivity has fundamentally transformed global trade. It's made it faster, it's made it much broader in terms of scope, but also more inclusive, allowing firms of different sizes, particularly smaller firms, reach global audiences with much greater ease. And the benefits of this digital connectivity are growing. Our research shows that digital connectivity reduces trade costs three times more today than it did 20 years ago. And that trend is continuing. At the same time, we also find that digital connectivity delivers what we're calling a double dividend. It means more international trade, as I just said, easier to connect globally, but it also means more domestic trade. And also, digital connectivity, open data means more trade for all sectors of the economy and for countries at all levels of development. So, whether you're a Philippine SME exporting back office services, you're a Japanese car maker, Vietnamese rice exporter, open data connectivity is fundamental for you to gain business traction. And the second thing that it means is related to what Camilla was mentioning. It means more open but also trusted data flows. This means enabling cross-border data movement while ensuring that we have the appropriate safeguards that build trust between different actors in the digital economy. So it's about the flow and the protection of data together. And this is sometimes something that we call in the policy world data free flows with trust. So I'll leave it at that.
Great. No, that's really helpful. How should we be thinking about the benefits of achieving this type of free flow of data with trust?
So I think that we need to first and foremost think about what it is that data gives us. What are the benefits kind of broadly, and then try to think whether we can start quantifying them. I think, first of all, thinking about data being the lifeblood of the global economy, clearly there are benefits from being able to connect with family and friends located in different geographical locations. There's also benefits of open data related to the support of research that addresses global challenges. I'm thinking, the development of vaccines in the context of COVID-19, but also, research related to the green transition. Importantly, as well for economic activities, the coordination of production along global supply chains, which dominate globalization, and of course, the reductions in trade costs that I mentioned earlier. But it's important to think about some of the concerns that cross-border data flows raise, from privacy and data protection to national security, cybersecurity, and regulatory reach. And here it's quite easy to think that we want our data to flow, but we also want it to somehow flow with the desired protection so that we're not operating in the Wild West. And so what's happened is perhaps some uncoordinated increase in measures that condition the movement of data or that mandates that data be stored locally. And so we've taken this evolving regulatory environment and thought through with some economists from the WTO about how we might be able to quantify this. And we released a paper recently in February about this. Maybe I wanted to draw your attention to some of the key findings from this work. Now, the first one is just how important open data is. And so we are able to quantify that if all economies were suddenly to restrict their cross-border data flows, we find that global GDP would fall by about 4.5% and global exports would fall by about 8.5%. So truly, those are very big numbers, really highlighting the importance of open data initiatives overall. The second thing that we found from this work, which I think is important here, is that the absence of data flow regulation is perhaps not a solution. Now, if all economies remove their data flow regulation, we would certainly see trade costs fall. So it would be cheaper to send data out. But we would also see much needed safeguards that generate trust benefits also reduce. And we find that overall GDP would fall by nearly 1% and global exports by over 2%. So the safeguards that accompany the data are important. But it is important to get that balance right. And that brings me to my third finding, which is that the type of regimes where we're seeing that which care about open data, but which also have transparent safeguards and sort of safeguards that take care of this open data initiatives, they can yield significant gains and lead to global GDP increases of about 1.7% and global increases in export of about 3.6%. So for us, the key takeaway from this work is essentially just how important getting this right is, and that we need interoperable, cooperative frameworks, not the current sort of fragmented approaches to open data and cross-border data flows. And this is why we think that international cooperation is critical in order to achieve this objective.
That makes perfect sense. And that number, that GDP number, is material. So it's always helpful to be able to quantify that when we're thinking about public policy responses. Which brings me to my next question, which is, and you touched a little bit on this in your last answer, but how also should we think about the role of public policy, and what can public policy do in terms of achieving the reduction in fragmentation and interoperability at a regulatory level that might deliver these benefits?
So I think that's also a really good question. And my personal belief is that public policy and international discussions can do quite a lot, and we have some numbers to back this up. But let me first maybe take a step back and just underscore how important the digital economy is for international trade and for global relations. We find that it represents around a quarter of global trade, digital trade, or what we might call digital trade. And we also find that in a world where we're seeing sort of a lot of tariffs, a lot of different geoeconomic new emerging situations, we're still finding that digital trade is the fastest growing element of international trade. And what we're seeing is that accompanying this increase in digital trade in the global economy is a lot of digital trade discussions. Since the year 2000, half of all the trade agreements that we've signed have a digital trade provision of some sort. That's over 120 different agreements. We're seeing the birth of new digital economy agreements that touch on new issues, including on issues of artificial intelligence, undersea water cables, digital identities. So really a lot of effort in trying to move the policy agenda forward and accompany this change. And also one that is very important is the WTO agreement on e-commerce, which is something where the text was concluded in July last year, and which we're currently trying to incorporate into sort of the WTO framework. And so to give you an idea of where we are in all of this in terms of policy, we've developed an index called the Digital Trade Integration and Openness Index. And this allows us to get a better sense of progress in these areas. And we have three key findings here. The first one is that we're making good progress. We've seen digital integration and openness rise, and we credit sort of that to also the increases in digital trade globally. But there's still a lot of work we need to do. We are only 8% of the way towards full digital trade integration. The journey ahead is long, but it is going to be full of benefits. The second is that there are strong differences across countries. There's a lot of countries like Singapore, like Australia, like the UK that have signed a lot of digital trade agreements or digital economy agreements, but there's a lot of other countries that have not. And sort of this poses challenges in terms of that interoperability that I was talking about earlier, because there's still a lot of markets which remain quite fragmented. And the last one is that it is really important to try and involve more countries into digital trade integration and openness, because they are the ones that tend to deliver. So having minimum standards is really important because that delivers quite a lot of gains. We find that if the WTO agreement on e-commerce would be signed and would be put into force between the 71 countries that currently support it, we would see global digital trade integration and openness increase by about 20%, which would lead to increases in trade of about 2%. So we're really talking about big numbers for a very minimal sort of type of standard agreement. So for me, international cooperation and public policy matters if we want to avoid regulatory fragmentation, if we want to ensure that we're generating the big opportunities and continue to accompany sort of the digital transformation in the sort of global digital economy.
It's really interesting. I might ask one just quick follow-up question to what you were just mentioning there. Given Camilla, her opening comment about there's no payments without the movement of data, we might argue that 100% of trade is digital in some aspects, because payments for the purposes of cross-border trade these days are digital. And so getting those agreements and commitments and the settings right for payments as distinct from broader financial services is a really critical aspect of future-proofing trade agreements that are being negotiated or updated or renegotiated as we speak. But to that end, how does the OECD define digital trade in all of the numbers that you're tracking?
So look, that's a very good question, and it's something that we ask ourselves quite a lot. You know, to what extent are definitions, or should definitions evolve as we move along? The way that we define digital trade is twofold, which makes things a bit confusing. First one is we take the WTO definition. The WTO definition says anything that is sort of digitally ordered, digitally delivered, or has any type of digital trace in it would be called digital trade, but it doesn't singularly identify the payments aspect of it. So that's why we don't count all trade as digital trade. The second definition, which is the one that our statistical modelers are using for statistical purposes, is digitally ordered or digitally delivered trade. So it's about trade that is ordered through specifically designed digital media, or trade that is digitally delivered. And that digitally ordered and digitally delivered trade is the one that I'm quoting as sort of representing a quarter of all trade. I have to say that I agree with your view that, ultimately a lot of this relies on international payments, which are inherently digital. And sort of perhaps that's one of the areas where we at the OECD need to think more carefully about sort of the invisible factors that are supporting this sort of global revolution of digital trade. And I think payments has a very big role to play in that.
Maybe just one to round us out, because I'm mindful that we're going to move into the next panel soon. But how do you think about thinking that we're looking at this from the perspective or with the lens of micro, small, and medium businesses? Is there anything that you could share with us around the specific benefits of digital trade, or the quantifiable benefits of a more cohesive international regulatory framework as it pertains to the benefits to smaller businesses?
Yes, I think so. From the perspective of someone that maybe sits in Paris and sort of in their desk running econometric regressions, we do sort of then check back with different firms and ask them, like, does this really make a difference? How does this really make a difference? And sort of the type of feedback that we get is essentially something like, okay, well, we're trying to trade, and sort of let's try and trace all our different activities to their digital components. And so, for example, we've talked to several SMEs that have highlighted, look, 90% of our clients are outside. and sort of we communicate with them through digital media. So that's one of like the digital connectivity element to it. But also some of the contracts that we sign are digital and require e-signatures. Sort of we need to make sure that with the type of agreements that we have in place, whether they're digital trade agreements in RTAs or provisions in RTAs or other, that we are able to recognize and have legal backing for having e-signatures and e-contracts. At the same time, a lot of SMEs then tell us, well, one of the problems we have is essentially that we do not know what level of protection we need to afford to what customer in what country, and we do not necessarily understand all the different mechanisms that are about and whether we are operating within the bounds of what we should be doing or not. And so all of that translates into a greater certainty, for instance, through provisions on cross-border data flows or through discussions on privacy and data protection and things like that. So whenever you talk to the SMEs and you ask them about the specific chapters that are in the digital trade discussions, there's always a very useful example that you can come with the way that these chapters can support certainty in their activities. And it also helps governments as well in terms of trying to meet legitimate public policy objectives.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That's fantastic. Javier, thank you so much. I think you lived up to your lofty introduction from my perspective anyway. I'm sure they'll tell us in the chat. If not, but from my perspective, thank you very much. It's enlightening and we learn something when we talk to you every time. So we really appreciate you taking the time to join us to kick us off. I think for the rest of us, thanks, Javier. And for the rest of our sessions today, there's a lot of food for thought there. And if we keep those sort of more macro principles in mind as we move into the next three panels, it will serve us well when we come back at the end to wrap up with some real tangible and practical recommendations from APFF into the ABAC process.